What's going on, guys? Pat here, and in this episode of the engine swap series, we are continuing the install of the LS7. So as you guys saw in the last video, we finally got the LS7 installed, but sadly it wasn't without its issues. The bell housing was misaligned to the block, which then caused the T56 to be misaligned, which means we had to take everything back out because it wouldn't install properly and wait for the offset dowel pins to come in, which are finally here. We got the Lakewood 14,000 offset ones, which I talked about in my last video. And while it wasn't a big issue, sadly that killed our progress. So I think at this point we're probably not going to make it to that event next Thursday. It sucks a little thing set us back that much, but it is what it is. Now that we have everything we need, we can just keep pushing forward like we originally planned to. Now since the last video, I haven't really done anything. I just kind of was frustrated with that issue, so decided to just take a few days off. The only thing I did was come out and install the master cylinders. Which, you know, really nothing too exciting here. It's the same Tilton. I believe these are the 75 series. I could be wrong though. The one for the hydraulic throwout bearing is, I believe, a 13/16. It's the same size we ran last year. Nothing changed there, but the two for the brakes did change. I'd said in some previous videos that I never really liked the brake pedal feel on this car. The pedal was super stiff and super short throw, so you couldn't really modulate it. I never even got to drive this on a road course, so I never tried to threshold brake, but my dad did get to turn a couple laps before we had issues at pit race, and even he said the brakes didn't feel great. He didn't really like the pedal feel either. And yeah, obviously we had those braking issues at Lime Rock, so the brakes were one of the things we really needed to address, and I think a lot of the issues and problems we were having will be resolved with these. Now I'm running a, I believe it's a 5/8 front master cylinder and then a 3/4 rear. So going to a smaller bore size means it's less pedal effort required to get to the same line pressure as a bigger bore size, but you have longer pedal travel, which, you know, how much you want is kind of up to, you know, each individual driver. So who knows, maybe we'll end up going slightly bigger than this to dial in the pedal effort versus travel. But I mean, this is a good starting point based off what I've heard from people I've talked to who run a similar brake and similar master cylinder setup. So I think that'll put us in a good spot. But getting back to the engine, the next thing I really need to get going on is taking the intake off so I can drill it for the map sensor. Like I said in the last video, the engine builder had just like installed a nipple and then ran a vacuum hose, kind of remotely mounted the map sensor. But per Performance Design, which is who makes this intake, you drill out one of the pre-made holes under the plastic casting, and then you can hard mount it in there. So I'm gonna start ripping this intake off, and then I'll catch up with you guys as we're progressing on installing the map sensor. All right, so got the intake off the car and disassembled here, so I figured I'd give you guys a quick tour. You can see the runners here that are removable, and you can actually change the length on them, which is pretty cool. Like I said in the engine introduction video, these are the longest runners, so in theory it should give us the most torque and the least horsepower. Pretty simple to change them out. If you want to change length runners, you can just take the top hat off, and then I believe there's just a couple O-rings, and there's like a clip that pops off. So really nothing too crazy here. I don't really feel the need to change it. We haven't even driven the car yet, so but if I want to change it in the future, then that's how I go about it. So as far as the map sensor goes, it said in the instructions there's two different ports that are kind of cast into this. You can see the first one here, so it is on the front of the passenger side, and then there's also one here which is on the rear driver's side. You can use either, just is giving you some flexibility with how you install the map sensor. Got my map sensor here, just a factory LS7 style one with the grommet, so you just pop it into the hole there. The hole to mount the grommet in is pre-drilled, but it's not connected to the intake at all, so the hole that we have to drill is in the top here. I believe it's this guy right here, so we're gonna have to take a couple of the runners out and just punch a hole straight down to open up the port, so it's actually seeing the pressure that the intake is seeing. You can see there's two mounting holes here. I believe they're for the different styles of map sensor. So you have like this style, which I believe is LS1, LS2, LS7, and you also have an O-ring style, which is for like the LS3, LS9, and LSA, I believe. So the way this one mounts is you just pop it in there, and originally I thought I was going to have to fabricate a bracket for it, but I had actually bought this plastic clip off Amazon. It's like a GM OEM retaining clip for map sensors, and I think it's actually going to work out nicely. It clips under the bottom side of the map there, then you just run a bolt through it there, which lines up with the hole that is already put there in the intake. How convenient. So really all I need to do now is just tap this hole because it's not tapped, and then I think we're in a good spot to hook up the map sensor and then get this back on the car. There's a couple other things I want to do while the intake's off as well. In the back here, there's an open 1/2 MBT port. You can see straight through it. I'm going to use that for the manifold air temperature sensor. You can use it for like if you have power brakes, or even some people run like remote map sensor, stuff like that. But since I don't have any of those things, I'm just going to tie in there. And then also on the engine itself, I need to put in the oil pressure sensor adapter. I forget, I think it's like an M16 or something thread here. And then obviously all the Holley sensors are 1/8 MPT. Didn't even know you need an adapter, kind of learning something new every day here doing the LS stuff for the first time. So I just got this from Earl's, just an adapter fitting. So I'll just put that on there, and then I can put in the oil pressure sensor. But one of the cool things we're doing, see if I can find it laying around here somewhere, is we are not just doing oil pressure. If I can find the sensor somewhere around here, it is a dual purpose sensor. Oh, here it is. There's a company called Low Dollar Motorsports. They do a lot of drag racing stuff. I'm not really sure how I actually found out about them. I think I was just looking up different sensors that work with Holley stuff. And they have a whole line of sensors that work with, I believe, like Race Pack, Holley, some AEM stuff. And so they offer like direct replacement sensors. Like I have one over here for fuel pressure because Holley's prices are a little egregious in my opinion. I don't think it's worth spending $135 for a pressure sensor. These pretty much have the same tolerances. In some cases their readings are a little tighter than the Holleys. So this is cool. This is a, I believe, 0 to 100 psi pressure sensor. So that'll go into the fuel pressure regulator, and it gives you a table with all the voltage versus readings and stuff. It's all 1/2 volt reference up to 4.5 volts. This one is linear, so I believe it follows the same voltage versus readout path that the OEM Holley one does, so I should be able to just plug that into the fuel pressure in the dash. But this one is one of their kind of custom sensors that they offer. And this is an oil pressure / oil temperature, which is really cool. Typically, if you want to do an oil temperature on an LS, you need to like drill a hole in one of the block-off plates in the oiling system, or if you're running an oil cooler, tap into those lines, or some of the adapter plates have a spot built in. But we're not going to be running an oil cooler on the car this year. I'm a big believer in letting data dictate whether you actually need something or not. You know, a lot of people build pro touring cars and they're like, oh, I need an oil cooler, oh, I need brake ducts. But until you have data that tells you that, you may not necessarily need it. And at times it can actually cause more harm than good if you're overcooling things and getting them out of their ideal operating range for temperature. So this will go into that spot, and there's basically 2 sets of wires in here. So I have the connector to plug in the oil pressure side into the oil pressure connector that's in the Terminator X-Max harness. I'm hoping I can change the voltage reference table in there to get this to match, because I believe it's slightly different. So if I were to just hook this up and it was expecting to read off of a Holley pressure sensor, then the reading wouldn't be accurate. So I'm hoping I can just reconfigure it in the software. I assume I can, but I haven't gone into the Terminator like computer software yet to verify that's the case. And then I'll actually just get another connector and add it in, because I believe the Terminator X-Max has like ports for a few additional sensors, a few additional inputs and outputs. I have an input-output adapter, but I don't think we're going to need to use that on this. So I'll just tie this in and configure the voltage versus reading range in the software. So that'll be cool. We have some more sensors that we're going to be putting on the car, like brake pressure and stuff like that, so we can monitor brake trace on track and also brake bias and whatnot. I haven't figured out how to work those in yet, so that's why I haven't really talked about it. But once I know how I want to plumb those in, then I'll add them in. But this should be really cool. I'm really stoked about this. I'm really glad I found this company. Not sponsored or anything. I just think it's really cool that these products exist. So definitely go check out Low Dollar Motorsports. I believe it's LOWDOLLER for sensors and whatnot for both Holley replacement stuff and then also some of the custom stuff like this. So I'm going to try and get this map sensor and all these adapters and fittings and stuff installed so we can get the intake back on, and I'll check in with you guys once we've made some more progress on that. Alright, so figured I'd check in with you guys while I'm making some progress out here. Last you saw, I was just starting to mess with the intake to get the map sensor installed. So I had tapped the hole. It comes precast but not tapped, so I had to go get an M6 tap here and then tap it for a bolt. I drilled the hole in the top of the intake, which you might be able to see over here in between those runners. So the map port is actually functional. And the issue I was running into is when I try and use this retainer clip, there's only one bolt hole on one side, so when I would put it on there and actually tighten it to retain it, the map sensor was twisting and lifting one side because there's only the force on that one side, and I wasn't really a fan of that because the map's really important for the Holly to tune off of, so you want to have a good reading there. That's the whole reason why I mounted it here in the first place and didn't do like a remote one, is you want this, of all your sensors, this is arguably one of the most important to have reading properly. So I didn't want to risk having a leak there of any kind, so what I did was I tapped this other side here, which is a hole for if you're using like an LS3 style map sensor, and I'm going to do a bridge across it to hold both sides. I actually made the piece, I just cut it out of a spare piece of 1/8 inch plate that we had here. Really nothing too crazy, it's just a rectangle, 2 1/4 inch holes. I cut it and toss some paint on it, so it's drying right now. I went with 1/4 inch because it's a little bigger than M6, so it gives me some wiggle room in case my holes weren't perfectly on there, but I already test fit that and it works as it should. It fits, the holes line up enough at least to work, and it supports both sides of the map sensor, so I think we're good there. Cross members back up here, we had noticed when we were putting the trans in that there was just a slight interference mark here, so we just hit it with the flat disc to clean that edge up a little more, and then I just sand it with 320 and hit it with the rattle can. Really nothing too crazy here. Once we're sure we're done modifying it, I'll probably take it out in the future and powder coat it, but until everything's in place and we've driven the car and we're sure everything's good, I don't really want to powder coat it now if I'm gonna have to redo it after. Same thing with the core support. Like, this is gonna get chopped up this coming winter, so we're probably just gonna rattle can this for this year, but that'll be discussed later in one of these build series videos. Now, regarding the transmission alignment, we finally started messing with that. We got those Lakewood offset dowels, you can see them right there, and after messing it with it for a couple tries, we finally got some good measurements on here. You can see our 0 point is up here. Aside from that, we're 4 thousandths off, and then we had a measurement of 1 thousandth here and then 5 thousandths here, so you subtract for your difference, and that's 4 thousandths. So we are finally well within spec on that. So hopefully, if that was the problem in the transmission not really going in properly, it should be cured now. But we are going to try and toss this thing back in, and we'll see if that was holding us up and that was the reason we had to take the trans back out. So we're going to toss this in, hopefully all goes well, and then I'll check in with you guys once we've done that. Well, working on project cars is a bit of an emotional roller coaster. Sometimes everything's coming together well, you're seeing your ideas come to reality and you feel like a genius, and other times things are all falling apart and you feel like a complete moron. And last couple days I've definitely been feeling like the latter. We went to put the transmission in once we fixed that alignment issue, and we ran into the same exact issue we've been running into. It would go in most of the way, and then that last like 3/4 of an inch, it just would stop. It'd feel like we were pushing it against the wall. So obviously it wasn't the misalignment that was causing that, so we were a little frustrated, took the trans back out, decided to just kind of spend a couple hours thinking about, you know, what could it be. And so we have a little inspection camera. We stuck it in there as we had held the transmission back up, and the splines were engaging into the clutch fine, so obviously it was hitting something in front of that, and really it was either the input shaft hitting the crank, which is highly unlikely, or there was an issue with pilot bearing. So we decided to look back into that. Now, the center force clutch comes with 3 different pilot bearings. One is for early model LS, at least that's the typical application, where it sits deeper in the crank, and then there's the later model ones like LS3, LS8, LS7, all that, and then there's the third one, which is that same bearing or pilot bearing, but it has a little bigger outside diameter for aftermarket cranks. So I figured, okay, well, it's pretty obvious we're using the late model one for aftermarket cranks. So we put it in, outside diameter was right, everything worked out easy, or so I thought. But looking back here, if you ignore the typical applications and you go by this chart they provide, they say to measure the stick out of the input shaft from the bell housing, and then based on that measurement, that's what dictates what bearing you use. You can see the 2 different positions here, A, where it sits further in the crank, and then B, which is the one we installed. Now, had I actually done that and measured the first time, I would have realized that this bearing application is based off of using an LS T56, which we don't have. We have a T56 Magnum. And so in measuring that, their input shaft stuck out 0.9 of an inch, which pushed it right in this range for pilot bearing A, which is the one that sits deeper in the crank. So ultimately it was my own fault. I used the wrong pilot bearing. I just quickly read through, and I should really take my own advice instead of just dishing it out and being a hypocrite. I always say when you're doing custom stuff like this, don't take parts that say they're going to fit at face value, measurement and verify yourself. And I didn't do that, and it came back to bite me. So I take back everything I said about you know, us missing the event, and it sucks because it was due to part variation outside of our control. It was my own stupidity ultimately that caused this. So definitely frustrating. I'm glad we caught it. If anything, I'm glad that we were able to see the run out issue, because I would have never seen that had we not had the transmission to hang up like that. So at least that got addressed in doing this. But after that, just wanted to, you know, put my head down and try and make up lost ground for the week delay that issue caused. So didn't really film too much, but I'll fill you guys in with where we're at now. So got the headers on. These are American Racing headers, stainless. They're 1 7/8 primaries to a 3-inch collector. This is the exact size header this engine was dynoed with, so I know it's going to support the power fine. I also verified with the engine builder before we got them, and he said that was a good size. So that's all set. Intake is obviously back on. Got the map sensor installed, which is, you can maybe see it peeking in there, and the map sensor in the rear. And you can also see that we have the injector harness actually ran now, which is something my dad did while it was off. We snaked as much through as we could through the center, just because when you're doing an LS, that's one of the worst things, is just how ugly the wiring is in the engine bay. So we wanted to try and hide it and clean it up as much as possible. So obviously we have the injector clips hanging out here, and we'll also have like the coil pack sitting up here, which I had to order a coil adapter harness, which I'm waiting for, because it wasn't included in the kit apparently. So that's coming, and once that's here, we'll mount the coils. They kind of sit up here on the top. That should be really the last thing in here. We got to put like the grounds on for the coils on the back of the head, but nothing really crazy. Most of the engine bay wiring is done. Back here you can see the oil temperature and pressure sensor. The pressure side's hooked up into the harness, and then the temperature side, I got to order the female side of that connector just so we can tie it into the harness. But really nothing too crazy. We're just kind of working on odds and ends here. So now the next big thing is just going to be figuring out the plumbing. I got the dry sump tank here, and so I need to put the wheel well and fender on just to get an idea of my clearances for line routing. I stuck on the dry sump pan adapter. That's an OEM GM part, just to adapt to AN fittings, because the factory style Corvette one, I believe it's just like a pre-made fitting that bolts in. It's not actually like a threaded fitting for the lines to go into the tank, so that converts it from that to AN lines. And then the fuel pressure regulator slash fuel lines I need to figure out. These are getting replaced. I have Fragola PTFE lined hose over here. They're race right, which was incredibly expensive. I have the AN6 for the fuel lines here, and then AN12 for the dry sump there. So the way Aeromotive wants their fuel pressure regulator plumbed is to have the feed going to both lines on one side. So we'll Y off the feed line and then feed both, and then come up to the front and then tie into both sides of the regulator with a single return. So just kind of working out the logistics on that, which is what I'm doing right now. So I'm going to continue working through the plumbing, and I will catch up with you guys once we've made a little more progress on that. Well, it certainly looks like we've made a lot of progress, but I can assure you we haven't gotten as far as it looks like. Last you guys saw, I was going to start plumbing the fuel pressure regulator, which I actually haven't even finished yet. I put in the bracket from the Motion Raceworks mounting kit. You can see it sitting here. I actually had to notch it to get it to slide over the top of these bolt threads, because I couldn't back the bolts out because I'd have to take the water pump and everything out. So just modified it a little bit to work. I actually ordered the wrong bracket. They make two, ones for a smaller style Aeromotive regulator, which mounts on like the bottom side, and then they have the large style, which mounts on the back side. And I didn't even look before I ordered, which is a very stupid thing to do. And of course I ordered the wrong one of the two. This is a bigger style Aeromotive regulator apparently. And so I made an adapter bracket. It's just a 90 degree to change that position. I actually had modified the air motive one that came with this. It's over there. I just put paint on it so it's drying. But basically it's just gonna mount like that and just kind of sit in the center, which is how these Motion Raceworks kit mount them. And then you have 2 lines coming from the fuel rail, and it actually crosses over and goes to the opposite side. So that fuel rail will go over to this side of the regulator, and then same with that one. And then the return will just shoot straight down the middle of the intake. And then obviously I have my low dollar Motorsports 0 to 100 PSI pressure sensor there. That'll be the fuel pressure sensor for the system. Now, the version of the Motion Raceworks kit I bought comes with Fragola fittings and 6AN hose to plumb it, which is over here. So it just kind of came with a bag of fittings. And I mean, the only thing I don't like about it is that it's not PTFE lined like the rest of the fuel line I'll be using is. So if I do like the mounting and how the lines are positioned and everything, then maybe I'll just remake it out of the PTFE stuff in the future. I should have enough leftover line from plumbing everything, but that'll work for now. Another thing I did since the last clip was put the coils on. These are just AC Delco, like GM OEM coils, which are crazy expensive. It was like $70 a coil. Definitely was not expecting that, but kind of is what it is. I'd rather have nice OEM stuff than aftermarket stuff that might give me issues. So this is a Moroso mounting bracket. I had to mount them up here because obviously there's no provisions on the valve covers to mount them there, and then the Moroso spark plug wires, which coincide with the kit. They're made to work with it, so pretty straightforward there. Just had to bend the boots to get them off the primary tubes, which kind of to be expected. Nothing really too crazy there. Another thing that took me way more time than I thought it would was this front course support. Now, we had mocked up this radiator. I just kind of loosely dropped it in, and I noticed that my brackets down there weren't going to work, the lower mounting brackets. They put the radiator too far over to the passenger side, so the tank actually hit the course support, and also the brackets weren't the right width. So I was trying to find the Weldon ones down there because mine were pretty rotted and trashed, and I had moved them way back when we first put a radiator in this car, an aluminum one, and so I knew they weren't really going to survive being moved again. And there's like a national shortage, like no one has them. So I was looking, and I noticed on this top core support plate that those mounts sure looked like they were just the lower ones spot welded in, and sure enough they were. So I drilled the spot welds, took the old ones out, and then put these ones on and lined them up. And took me, I think a big reason it took me as long as it did was because our on-off switch for our MIG welder died, so I had to TIG weld all this, which took way longer than it needed to, but got those welded in, and then I lined up the top plate here. I had to bend it a little bit to get the angles right. It's just loosely in there now just to hold it while I'm mocking up radiator hose routing and stuff, but had to bend this to get the angle right. This is just a pre-made bracket that comes from C&R. Then I had to drill the core support for the 4 holes here. Then I used some button head screws, nothing too crazy there. And then I also went in and TIG welded the factory square nut inserts that were used to like mount that old top plate in there. I just didn't like how it looked with like having not used nuts just kind of hanging out of the bottom there. So I just quickly welded them, ground them flush, nothing too crazy. It's not perfect, but it definitely looks better than it did. And then scuffed it all and hit it with Rust-Oleum. This is outdoor furniture paint, and it kind of captures the look I exactly wanted, which was I wanted that textured look that like Crinkle Coat has, but not as exaggerated as Crinkle Coat is, and I think this does that perfectly. So we'll see how durable it is, but I definitely prefer this over any kind of glossy paint that we've used in the past. I think we had semi-glossy paint on here last time, and it looks good at first, but then doesn't wear well at all. So we'll see how this holds up. This winter, like I said, we're gonna be cutting this all up, so if I don't like it, then I can just change it then. But on the interior of the car, my dad's been working on the wiring. Not really much you can see here. You can see our sort of electronics hub here with the fuse block, which is in the same spot as it was last year, and then where the MSD box used to be is now the ECU for the Terminator. We got all the wiring just kind of routed and run. We got the drive-by-wire pedal over here, which I need to mount, but we threw a battery on the car yesterday, turned it on just to see if the ECU would turn on and stuff. We pulled the fuel pump relay because the fuel line's right there, so I prefer to not spray fuel everywhere. But we're just doing kind of a sanity check, see if we had any shorts issues. Did it turn on like it should? Were the sensors that were plugged in reading properly? Everything looks good. We'll have a little more insight once the car's a little more together and we can actually test every single thing. But as you know, for where we are, it looks good so far. But obviously you can see the car's back on the ground now. Really for the next stage of mocking stuff up and getting an idea of routing, we need the car on the ground and we need the fenders on. So just threw the front wheels back on, dropped it off the jacks, and it looks like slammed on the ground. It's crazy. It's I haven't seen it on the ground with an engine in it since like December, so definitely a strange sight. Like when I first sat down, I was like, has it always been this low? But it's just kind of an optical illusion just because it's been like 3 or 4 feet in the air for the last 3 or 4 months. So yeah, here's where we're at now. Crazy amount of space in between the engine and the fans. On the 455, the water pump pulley would be right up on like the fan motor, but it almost looks like a Monte Carlo now with all this space up here. Pretty crazy. But I'm gonna get the fenders on here and the wheel ends so we can start getting an idea of the oil line routing and fuel line routing, because you know we need that stuff in there just to get an idea of where I can and can't run stuff. And that really should be like the last big thing we got to coordinate. The exhaust, although we got to weld it and cut it and stuff, we already know where it's going to go, but the AN lines are really the last big thing, and the radiator hose, but that's pretty straightforward. So I'm gonna keep putting some odds and ends on this thing, get the fender on and start mocking up these lines, and I'll show you where we end up with it. All right, well the car is back up in the air and finally making some progress on plumbing here. First thing you can see is the upper radiator hose is run. I'm not a huge fan of this setup of doing like the silicone to, I think it's aluminum tubing back to silicone. Long term, I'll probably move to a fabricated pipe that gets a little closer. Probably make an aluminum one that goes there to there and then have just shorter straight sections of silicone. I know a lot of people who do radiator hoses like this, and we'll see how it works out, but I don't know. I don't know how it's gonna function, but I also really don't like how it looks. Kind of looks hacked together, but it is what it is with the radiator that far away. I mean, I'd much rather do this than have like a rubber hose there, but it's still not great. I have the stuff for the lower hose over here. I have it together and cut to length. It's just going to be a 45 out of there and then straight into there. So I just need to put that together. I had to run out and get some T-bolt clamps for it, but I have those now, so that's all taken care of. I have the heater core bypass hooked up. As part of doing the dry sump and cutting that enclosure away, we lost the factory blower motor location and kind of that whole HVAC box. And long term, I'm going to go to like a universal unit from Vintage Air. It's a small compact unit where it's a heater core and a blower motor in one, but they were back ordered, and I think they're just getting back in stock now. And with how close we are to events, I'm really not going to have time to hook that up. So we're just going to run with no heater in the car, at least for the summer. And then when events slow down near the fall, we'll look at putting it under the dash. We have the wiring in place. We have a spot picked out. So it's just a matter of actually getting our hands on it and having time to do it. So that's where we're at with that. Have the breather for the valley cover routed here. This is just some of my Fragola race where I had a bunch of leftover 3/8 from the fuel lines. So it grabs the nipple there, it runs, it's hidden under the coil packs. I don't have it finally routed or cut yet, it's kind of hanging here, but the breather can is going to go around here, so we'll cut it as needed there to make that fit. Up under here, some of the important stuff, you can see the dry sump lines. We had mocked these up. I didn't really film it wasn't anything too exciting with the wheel well in place, because obviously you have to consider that where you're getting your height and actual path. So this is Fragola Race Right again, very expensive stuff, but also very nice. And this is 120 degree, see if you can see it, a direct fitting off the dry sump tank. And then I just have a 90 up there for the return. And it's hard to show without the wheel in here exactly how it's gonna route, but it'll like kind of come up over there and then run down. I would prefer to not have the supply line for the dry sump run upwards for that little bit, but it is what it is. There's not really a way to just run downwards through here, because obviously you have to contend with the wheel well, and there's like no space in here without risking pinching the line. So it is what it is. I know a few people have done that and they don't have issues, but you know, we'll see. The return for the dry sump tank though is pretty straightforward. It's on a weird arc right now because it's bolted to the pan, but it's not really clamped over how it's actually going to run down there. So looks strange, but I'll show you guys once we have the wheel well installed and it's finally in position. And the last thing I gotta do for the dry sump tank is run the line for the breather, which you can see I have a plug in it right now, but I have the half the hose already made. I just gotta screw it in there and then I'll run it under the fender, and then once we have the can mounted, I'll run into that. So really nothing too crazy there. On the fuel line side, we're currently in the process of taking the old fuel lines off. You can see them just dangling here. They kind of run up behind the engine. You can see where it transitions to hardline there. So we're gonna undo those there, and I have the new ones made. They're sitting over here in the box, so they're all ready to go. Here's the Y for the supply. So this grabs the hardline down here, and then it'll run up behind the engine, and then I have 245s to feed the rails. And then I actually had the place I went to just make a PTFE line for the return. The one fitting I needed is back ordered right now. I have the return line made out of the Fragola hose, but I'm just waiting for that fitting to come in. So I figured I don't want to lose another week or two waiting for back ordered parts. So we're just gonna run it with this, and then that's easy enough to swap out once I get that fitting in. The other plumbing thing is the power steering hoses. An issue we'd run into, I don't know if I talked about it in one of my videos or not, was the integrated reservoir on the pump. There's like a 6AN outlet. It actually hit the box, so we had to move to a remote style pump. So we have remote reservoir mounted up here next to the battery. So I had to have new hoses made, basically going from the feed of the pump, which is an AN10 on the bottom here, over to the AN feed on the pump, and then obviously we have a pressure line from right here to the pressure fitting, and then we have a return from the box back to the reservoir. Now if you notice, I have transmission coolers built into this radiator, and my plan is that if we need a power steering cooler, we're going to run it in there. I've always had power steering issues with this car of heating the fluid up more than I would like. So I don't know if that's just a function of like the pulley size that was on it, or if it was because the reservoir was so close to the head and that was heating up the fluid, or what it was. So we're gonna see how it is with the reservoir out here. We'll probably put a temperature sensor in there at some point and actually see what the temperature looks like as we're driving on the street, autocross, road course, all that stuff. And then if needed, I have this here without having to add an auxiliary cooler. So that's why I spec'd this out with this. And the same thing we're doing with like the oil. You know, we'll monitor the temperatures and see if we need a cooler or not. Another thing we did, which I didn't film, was we swapped fuel pumps out. Obviously with 700 horsepower, we're gonna need a bigger pump than we'd had before. Just trying to find the old pump, don't know where it went, but the one I went with is the Aeromotive 525 liter per hour. I think a lot of people refer to it as the Hellcat pump. It should more than support the horsepower I need, and dimensionally it was very similar to the pump that was in there. So we just kind of dropped it in. We did have to trim, there's like the plastic barb coming out of it where it kind of bolts into or screws into the assembly. I had to trim that down and also trim some of the metal nipple on the sending unit to get the height right, because if we put it in at full length, it would hit the bottom of the tank. Now another big thing that we've been working on is the exhaust. We are all done with this finally. Last night was a late night. One of my buddies came over who's good with TIG and tigged it all together. So obviously we have like the I think it's called like a bubble flare fitting here at the header, and then it goes to the flux connectors, which are TIG welded on. We go into the X pipe itself, also TIG welded. Go back to the Borla mufflers here, which are just clamped on, so that way I have flexibility if in case I want to change the exhaust configuration in the future. And then just goes to a 90-degree dump. And we have just hangers TIG welded on, which actually came with my frame brakes kit way back when, so I was actually able to repurpose those and use them. I didn't want to weld the mufflers on and weld the turn downs on, just so I have flexibility in the future in case I don't like this setup or I want to do something different, like a side exit or tailpipes or something like that. You know, I would hate to just have to buy another set of mufflers because we welded these ones on. So that's where with the exhaust. Big thanks to my friend Teddy for coming over and TIG welding those for me. I'm still very much a novice in the TIG welding game, and he has years and years of experience. You know, I trust his welds and I don't trust mine. So, you know, big thanks to him for coming over and helping knock that out, because without him I wouldn't have been able to do it. So that's really where we're at. That's the progress we made. Just kind of working on all the miscellaneous plumbing stuff. I'm gonna get back to this, run the new fuel lines, run the radiator hose, and we're getting pretty close to firing this thing up. Just gotta do some plumbing odds and ends. I gotta run like the steam port line, which actually that was another issue I ran into. So obviously we have the steam port line here. This is a Motion Raceworks kit. So we run from here to the nipple on the radiator, which is under the upper hose. And I had bought some nice Fragola push lock hose, because I was like, hey, it'd be cool to, you know, have all matching hose everywhere. Fragola's nice stuff, have it match with the nice black sheathing. And all the reviews for the race right hose were like 1 star, because it was very tight to put it on, and sure enough when I went to put it on, it would refuse to pop on even though it was the right size. So kind of abandoned that, and I'm just going to go with a 1/4 inch fuel injection hose. yeah, it doesn't look as nice, but it is what it is. It works. It'll hold the pressure and the temperature and all that stuff. So, you know, in the future, maybe I'll look at using a different style. Maybe I can just get away with using regular Fragola hose like what I did for the PCV breather. But since that's a pressurized system, I don't want to just throw on a hose that I'm not sure is going to work and then have it blow out. I'm a little paranoid about the cooling system after I had that hose blow out on me on track last year. So just taking all the precautions we can with that. That's why it's all silicone and metal and nice T-band clamps. I'm really trying to put extra thought into all the potential failure modes we're going to have on the car on track and address that. So I'm gonna get back to this. I gotta finish up doing the fuel pressure regulator, lower radiator hose, all that miscellaneous stuff, and I'll check in with you guys in a little bit. But we are getting really close to firing this thing up, so I'm really excited. All right, well, we finally got the plumbing wrapped up here. Got the radiator hoses in, got the rubber hose under that for the steam port all set. Breathers over here. I don't have the breather for the dry sump tank hooked up yet. I need a 45. I got in a 90, but the routing made more sense to kind of come up through the fender to keep it above the tank instead of dipping down. So need to have a 45 there to get it perfect. But got all the oil in it, in case you're wondering what 12 quarts of oil looks like just sitting on the floor. It's crazy. It's not going to be cheap doing oil changes in this thing, but got the distilled water and water wetter in the radiator. Looks good. No leaks so far. We've been letting it sit for probably like 5 or 6 hours now, and no leaks, which I'm happy with. You'll notice the mixed matched fuel lines at the front here. I have a nice Fragola hose here, and then I got an ugly stainless one there, and that was because I was tightening the last fitting. See if I can find it here. I think I threw it out, but these are draw over fittings, so you kind of slip it together and then you tighten the two pieces, which you can see here, and that's where you get your seal from. This is part of that Motion Raceworks kit for mounting the fuel pressure regulator, which you can see now that it's all mounted. And so I wanted to get that, you know, kind of tight to get a good seal on it. And I was tightening the last one, the 4th fitting out of 4, and it snapped in half, even though I thought I was tightening it just as tight as the other ones. But apparently I over torqued that one a little bit. So I have another one coming. It'll be here tomorrow. But that's on there because we are trying to fire this thing up today. Now that the plumbing's all wrapped up, the wiring's in a good spot too. Ran new starter wire. We're not finalizing lengths and locations yet until we have like the fender on. We have a little better idea of where everything's going to end up. You also notice the power steering reservoir isn't here anymore. I forgot that the starter solenoid goes here, and it was going to be a big pain to move all the wiring. So what we did was just basically shifted it here to this L bracket, so it'll sit here. So the hoses I had made will still work because it's pretty close to where it was, but that works out well for the wiring there. Inside the car, got the laptop sitting in there. I went into the EFI software for the Terminator and just set it up for the low dollar motorsports sensors. I'm running the oil pressure and fuel pressure. So I just had to go in and calibrate a couple tables, really nothing too crazy. And then I had to update the digital dash software to work with the Terminator. If you're running the Sniper with the Holley digital dashes, there's a specific software. And now that we're running one of their other digital dashes, I had to change the operating system on it. So I don't have that set up yet, but I'll get there. The goal is we're just gonna fire this up and run it off the handheld. And I think we're looking good with everything. I just went through and played around with the handheld just to get some of the key sensors on there, like AFR, oil pressure, fuel pressure. We always run that as like a little auxiliary dash. Obviously that's not going to be the main dash. I'll use my big 7-inch one, but just for firing this thing up, we should be in a good spot here. So I think everything is where it needs to be, and the next clip should be firing this thing up at long last after what is it, like 5 months of working on the car, and I put in the order for the engine like 7 or 8 months ago. We are finally at the point where we're going to fire this thing up. Just run it for like 30 seconds. Obviously the belt's not on. I'm waiting for the power steering pulley here, so I can't hook up the full accessory system. I'm actually waiting for pigtails for the fans, so you know, it's not quite in a drivable state or really even ready to run for a while, but this should be fine just to fire it up, let it run for like 30 seconds, see if we got any big leaks, critical errors, things like that. So I'll see you guys in the next clip where this thing's going to be running. All right, let's see what it'll do. There we go. there we go. Finally fired up. Super cool hearing this thing run for the first time in person. Obviously, I have the dyno video from when it was running on the dyno, but never got to hear this thing in person. It sounds pretty cool through the exhaust that we put together, but you know, we'll have a better idea once it's actually out driving under load and not shaking our shop apart and vibrating off the walls. So that's gonna do it for this one. Finally hit the big milestone of getting it run. Obviously, you know, some assembly required before we can actually take it for a first test drive, but it's not as much work as it looks like. We just gotta throw the fenders on, take care of some odds and ends, but the vast majority of the work's done. So you know, we'll be shaking this thing down and logging its first miles before you know it. So feel free to leave a like if you like this video, comment what you guys think of this, what you guys think of the sound, and subscribe if you want to see more. We're gonna have the final assembly on this, my reaction to the first drive, see how it compares to the big block Oldsmobile setup, and then obviously the first autocross miles. We got a lot of stuff coming up, so hope you guys are excited, and I'll see you in the next one.